We currently have 11 attendees. We'll get started in about a minute.
Okay.
All right, great. So it is now 7:30. We advertised this public session for information on the redevelopment process. My name is Alex McDonald, the business administrator for the Township of Millburn. Just a few housekeeping items. We do have this set up as a webinar, which means when we get to the question and answer period after Joe's presentation, I will call you in after you raise your hand. We are keeping this to an hour strictly. This is recorded and will be put on the Township's website for further viewing and for others who weren't able to attend to view. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Beth Zoll, who is the chair of the planning board, and will be introducing Joe tonight.
Great, thanks, Alex. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. As Alex mentioned, I'm the chair of the Millburn Planning Board, and I scanned a little bit on the list of our attendees. I know a number of you, and for those of you I don't know, I look forward to getting to meet you and work with you. So I have a few comments to share. In general, the planning board is guided by our master plan. In 2018, we prepared a master plan reexamination report, which reviewed prior documentation, including our existing master plan and also other recent efforts and studies. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of those and then hand it over to Joe. So in 2000, the DMDA, or Downtown Millburn Development Alliance, developed a plan for the downtown. Then in 2008, there was another plan developed for portions of the downtown area designated as area in need for redevelopment, which included calling for the relocation of the DPW site, and it called for creating compact development adjacent to the train station. Lots of different functions in the downtown. Again, you may be familiar with some of these documents or may not be. That said, there's the intent of me sharing this is that since for over 20 years, our leaders, residents have been mindful of what should happen in our downtown, what it should look like. Ultimately, while certain plans may or may not have been adopted, we've set forth a lot of ideas that are still relevant today and that our leaders are looking to when developing the downtown vision plan, which what I mean by that is a document that was put out in March of this year. It was a result of a township-wide study bringing together residents. We had virtual workshops. Our business community participated, creating a vision and identifying next steps that Millburn can take to improve the downtown. So while that's not the focus of tonight, I think it kind of lays the background for it. And that vision plan is available for everybody on the Millburn Township website. And the easy way to get that is to just go to Millburn Township and then you click business, and right there you can click on the downtown area vision plan. So it's very accessible. So we're here today as a result, like I said, of many years of thoughtful brainstorming and planning, but without having concretely moved too many of these efforts forward. Joe is here tonight to help us specifically give the overview of what we mean when we say the word redevelopment. I think a lot of people have maybe different definitions in their mind, and the redevelopment process, how the municipal land use law defines that. So I keep referencing Joe. Joseph Mariziti is a partner at Mariziti Falcon, LLP. He has his focus on practice areas such as environmental law, redevelopment law, and local government. He has many years of experience representing public sector clients throughout New Jersey. And we were just speaking, for those of you who didn't catch it, he thinks he's been here involved in Millburn for at least 13, probably going on 14 years. And he supported redevelopment projects, condemnation, not for us specifically, but for his different communities, land use, real estate transaction, and litigation in federal and state courts. Joe's well-versed in redevelopment law, and we're fortunate tonight to have him here in our corner. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe to walk us through redevelopment. And again, like Alex mentioned, it'll be Joe's presentation followed by some question and answer session. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Alex. And I'm pleased to have this opportunity to talk about the redevelopment process. And what I thought I should start with is describing what I'm going to talk about and what I'm not going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the process. I'm not going to talk about anything specific with respect to redevelopment in the redevelopment designated area in Millburn, but I also want to say that I welcome every question that I can get at the end of the short presentation I will give. I will give a presentation in the hopes that it will stimulate questions. I don't expect to answer all of them in what I'm about to say. It is a complicated process that is very detailed in ways I won't get into tonight. And it is a process that is dealt with by both a statute, the redevelopment statute, redevelopment and housing law to be specific. And when I talk about redevelopment, I'm talking about it with the uppercase R. That is redevelopment under the redevelopment and housing law, not just changing a site into a redeveloped position. So I'm talking about a very particular process. And the first slide is going to be talking about, if Alex, you could change it, what I'm not going to talk about. I am not going to talk about the municipal land use law. That's an important distinction to bear in mind as we go through this conversation, because redevelopment is very different from anything that people are used to in terms of the approval of projects under the municipal land use law. The municipal land use law has a very specific process for approving projects that are in line with zoning ordinances and dealing with projects that seek variances from zoning ordinances. I'm not talking about that process at all. I'm talking about a different kind of statutory process. So this will inform the rest of the conversation tonight. And I ask you to forget about most of what you know about the normal way that a project begins and ends in the normal process under a zoning ordinance. So Alex, would you turn to the next slide? I thought it would be helpful to just put up a slide that's going to be hard to relate, I know, to the area of Millburn, but this is the redevelopment area of Millburn that has been designated as an area in need of redevelopment. And I'll talk about that in some more detail as we go on. And I thought it would also be helpful, next slide, to show the context of the redevelopment area in terms of the downtown vision plan. The downtown vision plan is kind of hard to see on this representation, but the red is that area of downtown Millburn that is in the redevelopment area, and the dotted black lines are hard to see, but that defines a much broader area. That is the area that was studied by Perkins Eastman in connection with the downtown vision plan. So that just kind of puts things in context. And now if you could show the next slide, Alex. I have prepared a chart that is an effort in a simplified way to show the difference between the municipal land use law, which on this chart shows up as zoning, as compared with redevelopment. And there are many important differences, and I've just highlighted some of them. So the first indication that I put on that screen is a public-private partnership. Redevelopment provides that opportunity. That opportunity is not available under the municipal land use law and a zoning ordinance. So with a zoning ordinance, the municipality adopts a zoning ordinance. And if a property owner has a project that complies with the general outlines of the zoning ordinance and the specific outlines of the ordinance, in other words, it fits, then that is a development as of right. That property owner or applicant can proceed to develop that property and without any further really specific involvement of the municipality in control of what happens. So the next item there is whether there's an active municipal role or not. And there's not an active municipal role with the municipal land use law. You adopt an ordinance and you wait. You wait for an applicant to operate, to implement that ordinance. And that could be a prompt response, or it could be years. It can sometimes be decades to actually see a project that fits within the zoning ordinance that somebody wants to build. Within redevelopment, there's a very active role to stimulate the project, to move it forward, to engage it, to be a robust participant in the process. That's different. So in order to qualify for a redevelopment area, there must be a satisfaction of very specific designation criteria that are set forth in the statute. And basically, to summarize, they are what you would expect. Criteria that describe an area that is languishing, that is dilapidated, that is not producing what you would expect it to produce. So that is something that must be done in redevelopment. It's not a condition of the municipal land use law. Likewise, the redevelopment process provides and requires the preparation of a redevelopment plan, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. A plan is often confused with a redevelopment designation study, and I'll distinguish those in a minute as well. In redevelopment, who selects the party that's going to redevelop the site? It's not necessarily the property. That's sometimes a surprise to people, that the municipality has control. If it adopts a redevelopment plan and it's gone through the process, it gets to decide who redevelops the process, the project. The example I often give is that if a municipality were to designate me, for example, as a redeveloper, they'd be in bad shape because I don't have the financial capability or the experience to implement a redevelopment project. That's often true of a property owner who does not have that experience. And so just because you're a property owner does not mean you are automatically designated as a redeveloper. Oftentimes, the property owner is selected. And that is certainly true where the powers of condemnation are not going to be utilized. And every conversation I've had with Millburn is that there's no intention at all to implement the powers that otherwise exist to use condemnation to acquire private property for redevelopment purposes. So the next line item there, billed as a right, that I've described before, if a property owner has a project that fits within the zoning ordinance or gets a variance for it, they have a right to do it. Not true with a redevelopment project. It's not a right. It is something that comes from the exercise of the next item of maximum municipal control. Redevelopment gives the municipality the opportunity that does not otherwise exist in the redevelopment agreement, which also I'll speak about more. The redevelopment agreement between the municipality and the redeveloper provides for the specific description of the project to be developed. It can be very specific. Depending on the leverage that the municipality has in the negotiation of the redevelopment agreement, you can be very specific about what you want, what you don't want in terms of a project. Likewise, you can be very specific about the schedule of when it's going to be built. And that's not the case with operating under the municipal land use law, because as I mentioned earlier, you adopt the zoning ordinance and you wait to see when somebody wants to implement it. With redevelopment, you establish schedule items that are enforceable in terms of when the project will be constructed and completed. The next area that I've indicated is improvements limited to rational nexus. In the case of municipal land use law, there is a very limited area of responsibility that can be imposed on the developer to provide local infrastructure improvements. They have to bear a rational nexus to the project. So the example that's often given is water or sewer lines. You can require a redeveloper to contribute to the expansion of water and sewer lines, but only to the extent required by that development. That's not the case with redevelopment. It can be much more expansive than that. And that leads right into the next line item of negotiation of community amenities in connection with the redevelopment process. When you get to the step, which is a future step that we're not ready for yet in Millburn, of negotiating a redevelopment agreement, depending on the leverage of the municipality and the financial rate of return to the redeveloper, you can negotiate amenities beyond those that are required by the redevelopment project. Oftentimes it's open space improvements, parks, recreational facilities. We were involved in a project where a public gym was provided as part of a redevelopment project. In another place, an amphitheater was provided as part of a redevelopment project. It's all a question of the pro forma and the leverage the municipality has, and Millburn has enormous leverage. It's a very desirable community. The other last two items on this page are the long-term tax exemption option. And I mentioned, I've had that indicated in italics. It's an option. It's not something that's required, but it does provide an ability of the municipality to provide for a financial agreement with the redeveloper that will identify the payments that will be made in lieu of taxes over a 30 or 35 year period or some lesser period. That's not available in connection with the municipal land use law project. There's no such availability. And similarly, a short-term tax exemption option does also exist, which is what it says. It's a shorter term, it's 5 years, it's very limited. But again, it's only a feature of the redevelopment process. I covered a lot of material on this slide and I expect a lot of questions. I hope so. Alex, can you turn to the next slide? That's not the slide I expected to see. So, oh, good. Thank you for populating it. So this is a slide that I know you can't read, that identifies the multiple steps in the redevelopment area process. And the good news is that you've done most of these steps in Millburn. If you could turn to the next slide, Alex, you will see that there's only 3 steps remaining, the last 3 on that earlier slide. And that is the preparation of a redevelopment plan. And on this slide, I've indicated basically what the process is. The municipality, the governing body authorizes the preparation of a redevelopment plan. You're at that point now, because the area that I showed on an earlier slide with the redevelopment outline, that area has been established as an area in need of redevelopment a number of years ago. And more recently, Paul Phillips, the planner for the municipality, has issued a supplemental report reaffirming that determination. Even though a number of years have passed, there's been no material change that would change the designation that he found was valid back in the earlier designation. So that process is over. Now we're at the stage where you adopt a redevelopment plan. And the redevelopment plan is essential to the availability to the municipality of the redevelopment powers, which are extraordinary, and are the ones that I outlined on the earlier slide. The redevelopment plan, once it's adopted, authorizes the municipality to enter into a redevelopment agreement with the designated redeveloper. And that would provide for all the benefits that I've talked about before. So how do you adopt the redevelopment plan? The governing body authorizes the preparation of it, or it can ask the planning board to do it. Typically, redevelopment plans are prepared by a consultant chosen by the governing body. Then it's submitted to the planning board, because the planning board has a role, and the planning board either reviews the plan or it prepares a draft plan. But I'm going to operate on the presumption that the redevelopment plan is prepared by the governing body, reviewed by the planning board, and the planning board review is to determine whether the redevelopment plan is consistent with the master plan or is designed to implement provisions of the plan. And it submits a report to the governing body, getting into the weeds now. There's 45 days to do that. But the governing body then considers the comments of the planning board. It can modify the plan. It can reflect those comments from the planning board, or it can choose to adopt the plan, even if the planning board decides that the plan is not consistent with the master plan, as long as the governing body does that with a supermajority, a majority of the board, of the governing body, and identifies on the record its reasons for doing so. Alex, could you move to the next slide? So there are a number of redevelopment plan requirements. I've set up a list of them. It basically boils down to, I'm not going through each of these bullet points. It basically boils down to the fact that the redevelopment plan will establish the new zoning for the area. And it can either be a superseding plan, which means it wipes out all the prior zoning, or it could be an overlay plan, which means that you have like a layer cake. Underneath is the redevelopment, is the zoning that would exist normally in the area. And on top of that is the option of the redevelopment plan zoning. That's not common. Most commonly, redevelopment plans supersede the zoning because the zoning basically has failed in producing anything that revitalizes the community. So the purpose of the plan is to set a new stage for the development of that area. If it is a superseding plan and it eliminates the prior zoning, it doesn't wipe out the uses that are already in existence in that area. They can continue as so to speak, grandfathered zoning, pre-existing zoning, and they can continue as long as they don't expand or change. If there is an effort to change the project to do something different, it has to comply with the zoning that is established in the redevelopment plan, and that requires coming to the governing body to be determined to be a redeveloper to implement that redevelopment plan zoning. The last point on this slide is a key point, and that is that the plan can always be amended. It has to go through the same process. It has to be referred to the planning board, get comments from the planning board, and be adopted only after a public hearing, because it's adopted by an ordinance. And I think we can now, Alex, go to the next slide. And this is just to kind of identify some of the big issues that I think are involved in the redevelopment plan. And I always think of a redevelopment plan as a hybrid By that, I mean it's a kind of a mixture between a master plan and the zoning ordinance. It's got the features of a master plan because it's aspirational, it's visionary, it contains those kinds of comments typically, but also it has the features of a zoning ordinance because it contains very specific provisions concerning what can be built there in terms of height and mass and side yards and front yards and so on. So those are provisions that are there. My second bullet point is something I feel strongly about, is that, and most every client I have is very much involved with a robust community involvement, and that is something that has been manifested in Millburn by the downtown visioning plan. A similar kind of a process would be followed in terms of preparing a redevelopment plan. And the plan can contain optional provisions, not just the statutory required ones. And what I've listed there first is what is a very important feature of the practice. It's not in the statute anywhere, but it is a practice throughout New Jersey and the many communities we represent, where if you're selecting, once you adopt the plan, then you go through a process of selecting the redeveloper. And a redeveloper selection is key because all these efforts are going to culminate in the implementation of the plan by a redeveloper and culminate in the redevelopment agreement. So the selection of the redeveloper is very important. And that is an interesting process in New Jersey, in that there isn't any process required by the statute in New Jersey. A redeveloper can, in effect, knock on the door and convince people, hey, I can do this. Or more commonly, and I think more appropriately, an RFQ, an RFP process, a request for qualifications, a request for proposals from a redeveloper is the appropriate way to go. That's common. And after receiving proposals, then there is an interview selection process. And that is a process that results in the selection usually of one, but it could be more, redevelopers to go into the next stage. And the next stage would be to negotiate a redevelopment agreement, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. A redevelopment agreement, as I've mentioned, is the culmination of everything. That's what you seek to get to. And so normally what we have done is to, after interviewing redevelopers, our clients select one of them to go on to the process of being designated. But it's not an immediate process. It's a multi-step process. It is a question of identifying a redeveloper that you're interested in, but not ready to commit to. And so that leads to the designation of a conditional redeveloper with a conditional redevelopment and interim cost agreement. And the interim cost agreement that accompanies the designation of the redeveloper also provides that the redeveloper will fund an escrow with the municipality that will defray all of the costs that the municipality incurs in negotiating the redevelopment agreement. And there may be many different types of professionals that will be needed to negotiate the right redevelopment agreement. It's a conditional agreement because if after a period of time there's not a meeting of the minds on the terms of the redevelopment agreement, the relationship ends. And I read recently about a municipality nearby that has just terminated such a deal. So it is often identified as sort of like an engagement before the marriage being the redevelopment agreement, the engagement being the conditional designation and interim cost agreement. And that sometimes takes months or longer to negotiate the redevelopment agreement. And I mentioned in this slide that, in redevelopment plans, there are now more and more green building and sustainability requirements that are written into the redevelopment plan as a feature of the ultimate redevelopment. Alex, if you could go next to the next almost final slide. That is the outline of what's in the redevelopment plan. I'm not going to go through them each in particular. In redevelopment agreement, the key issues there are designating the redeveloper, which I've talked about, defining with as much detail as you can negotiate what the project description will be, prohibiting against the construction of a different project, and providing a project schedule. Other features are, as I've alluded to before, the negotiation of community amenities, infrastructure improvements, and environmental remediation responsibilities, pilots, payments in lieu of taxes is an option there, and the termination default. Those legal things that you see in every agreement are part of what a redevelopment agreement would contain. And so you can skip that. I think we're getting close to the end of the time you've allotted. So I will take each and every question. The tougher, the better. I like the tough questions. Thank you all.
All right. At this time, we just ask that anybody who wishes to ask a question, raise your hand. We'll bring you on to speak and ask your question or questions. Once you're finished, we'll remove your permission to talk, allow Joe to answer the questions so that we can try to get through everyone. We do have 20 attendees here tonight, which is a great turnout. Appreciate everybody being here and participating and looking to ask questions on the subject. Again, this session is being recorded and we will put it up on the township's website to be viewed by others or those who weren't able to participate. So first and foremost, just try to keep your comments limited so we can get through everybody, as well as, make sure that you raise your hand if you wish to ask a question. All right, first up, Mr. Cosgrove.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
We are.
Okay, good evening. Dave Cosgrove, I'm at 99 Oakview. I actually have a couple questions, but I know there's other people, so I'll stick to one. And perhaps I can come back later if there's time. But sir, you mentioned, I think on the second slide, that the rate of return was an important issue. And I'm just curious if you could describe rate of return for who? And what are the standards or the expectations on the rate of return?
Sure. The rate of return is for the redeveloper. We recommend that the municipality in the negotiation of the redevelopment agreement seek a pro forma from the redeveloper and have that reviewed by a financial consultant to determine that the assumptions that go into establishing the pro forma are valid and correct, such as construction costs, likely sale or rental costs, and things of that sort, and evaluate the rate of return that the redeveloper expects to obtain, and determine from that number the extent to which there's room for the municipality as a partner in this public-private partnership to share in some of that rate of return by way of community amenities, community benefits, and things of that sort.
Dave, you can go ahead and ask another question if you had it. We only have one other person with their hand raised.
Okay, so I'm gonna get lucky tonight.
Yeah.
I have a lot. I can go on all night. I'm sure Alex.
Now
and Beth can
everybody's
tell you
raising their hand. So go
Okay.
ahead and ask another question. And
I
then
must have
gotcha.
said something that got everybody interested.
Hopefully, the next. But thank you, folks. The next question then is, who are we trying to benefit here? And my real question there is, what is the benefit to a resident such as me? I don't run a business in town, and you know, we've seen so far in town, at least in what I've been involved in, that the town, the planning board, you know, allow us to talk about things. But then the comments and the concerns we have never make it into the project. So I'm just curious as to, you know, at what point or what methods are available to make sure that a resident like me not only just gets heard because he wants to talk, but you know, the concerns actually get put into the plan.
Okay, so I said that I urge a robust community engagement in the development of the plan. And there's a precedent for that recently in Millburn because of the downtown visioning process that was conducted by Perkins Eastman. And I wasn't involved in all the community meetings, but I do know that there were many comments that were received from members of the public. So I hope and I expect that that will happen because I believe very strongly that for redevelopment to succeed, it has to have community buy-in because it takes a long time to go forward with a redevelopment project, and there needs to be a steadfast commitment and support from the community throughout a long process. So you also asked, who are the benefits for? Well, I'm involved in this process because I strongly believe that the community should benefit from redevelopment. I was the chair for 4 years of the State Development and Redevelopment Commission, and I saw the problems all over the state, and I saw some success stories all over the state. So I mentioned that this is a public-private partnership. So that means there's got to be benefits for both parties. I strongly believe that the community has to benefit significantly from the project. And I, therefore, am an advocate for the negotiation by the community of the strongest benefits they can obtain. And that gets back to your question about the pro forma and the rate of return. Because you look at that, and that, by the way, the consultants who do that will be reimbursed through the escrow. The municipality will have an expert, I hope, that will look through that document, that pro forma, and say, wow, this project's going to run off a lot of benefit to the redeveloper. Let's get some of that back for the community. And that is where we negotiate community benefits that can be, based upon the leverage that the pro forma provides and what the community provides. And Millburn, my gosh, is one of the most desirable communities in the state for any kind of development. So I would expect that there would be a lot of leverage that Millburn would have when you get to that point and identify what are the benefits that you want for the community beyond the fact of the transformation of publicly owned properties that are not producing, in most cases that here, these are publicly owned properties that are not producing tax rateable. So there's a tax rateable benefit, not the most important benefit, but it is a benefit. There is a benefit to the community from the creation of construction jobs and long-term jobs. So that's an important benefit. There's also the revitalization benefit to the rest of the businesses in the downtown. It's often talked about having the need for wallets on the street to spend money in the community and benefit the other existing, long-term existing benefits, businesses in the community. So there's open space, there's green features, there's many other ways through the negotiation process that the benefits for the community can be enhanced.
So Joe, just real quick, this kind of goes back to your description between an active and a passive role the municipality has, and the difference between acting through zoning and acting through an area in need of redevelopment or redevelopment plan, right?
Yes. That's exactly right. That's the difference. You can't do it with the normal municipal land use process.
All right, next up, we have Mr. Hildner.
Tom Hilder, 10 Exeter Road. You've been involved in redevelopment projects for a lot of years. To make this somewhat concrete for us, can you give some examples of redevelopment projects, maybe in local towns in this part of the state, which you think were successful, and what exactly happened with in the redevelopment? What did they do so that we can see how, or at least get some sense of how the town changed and developed in a concrete way, the kinds of things that were built where you think it really worked very well?
Sure. I'll start. I'm coming to you from Summit. I'm just down the street. And I represent Summit as the Redevelopment Council here. And we haven't implemented a project yet, but I can tell you about it from the point of view of what's publicly available. There are so many similarities between Millburn and Summit. In Summit, many of the properties are public parking lots. Once again, not providing ratables in an area of the community that is not very vibrant, Broad Street West. And so Summit is on the verge of a redevelopment agreement with a combination of L&M and Toll Brothers to transform that area into an enormously vibrant and robust place. It will replace the fire station there, will be relocated, and there will be residential, retail, open space, maybe office, maybe other things. We have also been involved, and this is not as close as Summit, but we've been involved for many years in Hoboken, a different community, but a community which has areas that have been neglected because they're industrial areas and nothing has happened there. So we represented Hoboken in the negotiation of a complex redevelopment agreement that provided for the construction of a residential building on a site that was identified for a certain number of residential units, as were other sites around it. They were all ultimately acquired by the same redeveloper who said, upgrade the density on one site, and I will give to Hoboken the other two sites for open space. And I will also provide and construct a public gym and turn that over to the municipality, a public gym, not a gym for the use of the residents in the redevelopment residential building. And in Hoboken, I'm sure know, there's a big flooding problem. And so in addition to that, another community benefit that was provided in that negotiation of that redevelopment agreement was to construct a very much enhanced underground storage detention facility that could hold stormwater and bleed it out over time into the stormwater disposal system. Just highlighting some of the things that have been done like that. We've worked in, I mentioned an amphitheater, that's in Perth Amboy. It's on the waterfront overlooking the Raritan Bay. It's a component of something that you won't have in Millburn for sure, a warehouse project, but as part of the warehouse project, a negotiation was successful in the construction of a publicly available amphitheater that is just about completed. In addition, environmental remediation, often overlooked as a component of redevelopment. I have no idea what those issues might be yet in Millburn. But when you enter into a redevelopment agreement with the redeveloper, you talk about who's going to pay for that. And you make sure it gets done so that the contamination that has oftentimes lingered and poses a threat to public health and welfare is remediated and dealt with as part of the redevelopment process. I could go on, but I'll stop.
Joe, just out of curiosity, and I don't know the answer to this, but in Summit, are they leveraging the redevelopment process for the reconstruction of their fire station or no?
Yet to be negotiated. We're at that stage.
Gotcha.
It's part of the process.
Thank you.
It'll work.
Mr. Feld.
You hear me now?
Yes.
First, Alex, will you please post the slide deck tomorrow?
Yes.
I think it's very important.
Along with the recording, we will post everything.
Because I think the slide deck where it shows the comparison of the map of the redevelopment area versus the downtown vision is very important to appreciate. I'm just concerned because of two phrases that the attorney used. He talked about robust community engagement and there has to be community buy-in. How do you measure that? Because we had a situation last week. If you counted the number of heads who objected, they were overridden. So how do you measure community buy-in? Do you give additional weight to certain people or certain parties? Or does everyone stand equally? I'm just trying to figure out, because you use those phrases, community buy-in. And we had a situation last week where there didn't appear to be community buy-in as to something that was happening. I'm just asking you because we're going to go into process because what we're talking about is looking back at the redevelopment plan that was rejected in 2008. And I think as the community, we're going to revisit that. And the question is, there's a lot of new people in the town who weren't here in 2008. There are a lot of old timers. And the idea about what happens to the DPW, I think you need more than like 2 public forums. This is a very big issue. And that's the issue that really determines community buy-in. And I don't know if it's something that to do something that dramatic, whether it requires a referendum or how do you measure it? Because we had a very bad situation, in my opinion, last week, where the public, if you counted heads, were against what the action that the government took last week.
So I have no idea what happened last week, but in terms of buy-in, I think the perfect example of that in Millburn is what happened with the redevelopment plan in 2008. It was submitted to the public. There was no public buy-in. It did not go forward. So how exactly you measure that? I don't think you provide certain points to certain people. I think it's a question of getting a consensus. And it's often difficult to get a consensus from an entire community because oftentimes only certain people speak out. And it's important to go beyond the voices of the certain people who speak out to try to engage the rest of the community in the process. That happened with the redevelopment plan that was not adopted in 2008. And that effort to go beyond and get as much community buy-in as possible has happened recently with respect to the downtown visioning plan, where I saw reports about a lot of people providing a lot of comment on that plan. I don't know the numbers, but I'm thinking a couple hundred people were involved in virtual participation in that plan. And I think, it's important. Now we've learned through the pandemic, we can deal with each other virtually. And it's important to get the voices of people in the entire community, not just people who are able to come to public meetings and follow all the events, but others that we need to engage in this process in a broader way and get as many people's points of view as possible.
Thanks, Joe. All right. Next, Mr. Chase.
Yes, Thomas Chase of 6 Clinton Place. Thank you for hosting this tonight, guys. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Hey, so I think concurrent with this is the negotiation by the planning board of the township's fair housing obligation. And I guess the long-term strategy on that has been to implement overlay zoning in certain areas. So that's very sort of a similar project as the overlay zoning that you discussed here. Can you comment on how the plan of the township to meet its fair share of affordable housing obligation coincides with the redevelopment planning that you described here?
I think it's too early to talk about that. I've been talking about the process, and I am not speaking about anything specific in terms of a redevelopment plan, what it would say, and what would happen with respect to proposed redevelopment projects. So this meeting tonight is supposed to be pretty bare bones in terms of the process. As a prelude to the question you asked, of much more detail that will follow as we go further into the process. But right now, we're attempting to put a frame around the whole conversation so that it can be better understood by everyone in terms of how we're proceeding, what are the guidelines of the process. So that's a question that will be important as we go forward.
Thank you. Mr. Footer.
Hi, Richard Footer, 333 Millburn Avenue. I want to learn, if you could briefly explain, what is meant, you had listed prohibition on construction of a different project. What?
Yeah, I'll tell you. That's a fancy way of saying, or a simplified way of saying, that there will be a covenant in the redevelopment agreement whereby the redeveloper agrees that it will implement only the plan that we have described in the redevelopment agreement, and won't be any bait and switch kind of a thing where they're saying they're going to build this and then they build that. And that's why I always say that maybe the most important elements of the redevelopment agreement are Exhibit A, which is the project description, describing the project in specific detail, as much as you can get the other party to agree to. You can even agree what the paint colors are going to be, and things of that sort, if that's important, as a way of illustrating how specific you can get in the redevelopment project. And the other exhibit that's very important is the project schedule, Exhibit B. When is it going to be done? And if it's not, in line with the project schedule, there are termination rights, and you can move on to another redeveloper. If you've got a redeveloper who's just land banking and not moving aggressively in terms of implementing the project.
Thank you. Ms. Pasternak.
Hi, good evening. Thanks again for hosting. I want to go back to the community engagement comments. I think what I'd like to be a little more sharp on that whole topic, because I feel, especially during COVID, that people have gotten unused to civic participation. They had so many personal problems to deal with trying to just get through this, that they've kind of put that as a low priority in our community, in most communities. So I think people are coming out from under that, and they are starting to learn some things. And I think the demonstration of that was at the last township committee meeting, where a rather significant number of people submitted a petition against an ordinance loosening up the restrictions on restaurants coming in to B2, B3, B4. People were getting more, feeling more confident in being able to come and voice their objections. So I guess what I'd like to just explore a bit more with you, Mr. Maraziti, is your sort of a similar question as to what has worked with civic engagement and your deep experience. In other words, the kind that we're used to, which is gathering together in a public meeting area somewhere where many people can gather rather than just the boardroom, where people can come together. There are, whiteboards where people can throw up ideas, et cetera, that there are small groups that can discuss things. There's lots of different ways of skinning this cat. But I think so far, beginning with the downtown vision presentations, where I know you feel that there was a lot of participation, but in my estimation, there were quite a few people that were already pre-primed. They weren't really representative of the whole community. They had already been assigned to the group to work on this. They were people who were on committees that have been appointed. So the general public wasn't even really aware. And even this meeting, for example, was sort of buried in the website. A lot of people didn't even know how to find the sign up link. So I just feel that we have to kind of hit this a little bit more robustly as to how we're going to get the 2008 type of participation from the community. And where have you seen it recently with the COVID impact working? And how can we be feeling trusting of our local government and their advisors like yourself, making sure that we get a voice, okay? And then my second question is the projects that are sort of coming up ad hoc, I would say. I mean, maybe some people's minds, this has been around for a while, but something like the approved now allocation of funds potentially and borrowing of funds to do the removal of flex parking. And you have on the table ideas like two-way parking, et cetera. Are we putting the cart before the horse by doing and approving funding for such a project when you have something much broader that could potentially be impacting, more than just the downtown area, obviously? Are you in sync with that way of doing business? Or do you think these things should be put in a broader context before we go and borrow money and put the residents on the hook? And then my third thing is, sorry.
I hope I remember all these questions.
Don't worry. So the first one's about robust engagement. The second is about whether we're putting the cart before the horse with the whole flex street parking removal. But the third thing is, where do the residents fit in? I rarely hear reference to the residents and their interest and their, but how's this all helping the residential population? I hear it at the planning board. I don't hear that referred to at the township committee meetings very often. And I think that we're feeling, the people that I talk to, and I do speak to quite a few people, they feel that the residents' interests are not being even considered in some respects. So those are my questions. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, they're all good questions. And I think the third and the first question are related, about community engagement. And I think that part of the process of community engagement is depending on people like you to encourage it and be part of it. And the other people who are on the call tonight to participate. It should be, and I have every expectation that, like the downtown visioning process, it will be an open process. Now, that doesn't mean everybody will participate, because we have that problem in our civic life these days. Not everybody does. But I know that there were many efforts to expand the process of engaging people. Now that, fortunately, the COVID restrictions are being lifted, the other types of engagement that were discussed in the downtown visioning plan are there for implementation, getting involved, with efforts outside, and having people at the farmer's market have a place to go to say something about this when the time comes. It's not there yet, but when the time comes, there are many ways that it can be done. And although it's not written in the law, I think it's written in the practice that it's important to give everyone an opportunity to be heard and participate. That doesn't mean that you accept every comment, because not every comment can be implemented, but it should be given respect. With respect to the second question you asked, I don't know anything about what you were referring to about what happened last week. I don't think I have a comment to make on that. I just want to say that I'm an advocate for citizens to be engaged in the government of, by the people, for the people, and with the people. I mean, that's what we're about in this democracy. And I think it's very evident in the redevelopment process that it be fully engaged and accepted and implemented.
So, yeah, and I just like to point out that the information about this session was on the township's website as a news feed. It was put out via social media, and it was also put in the mill wheel as well, the newsletter that's sent out to over 4,500 people in the township. So I just, I know that there's always going to be instances where people feel like they don't get the information or that it's hidden somewhere and things like that. But I think, this was communicated certainly, and, I just want that to be clear. All right, we have a little bit more time. We'll take another 5 minutes, if that's okay with Joe and Beth. We
Yeah.
just have two follow-ups here. So we're going to end it with Mr. Footer and Mr. Chase. We'll allow them to ask their questions. Mr. Footer.
Yes, I had one follow-up question that I guess Alex thought I was done.
No, I was just keeping everybody to one question, and then
Oh.
I, if we had time, we'd come back around. So here we are.
Okay, I understood what you said about the municipality having control, passing an ordinance for redevelopment, picking the developer, being a partner, gaining amenities, and also covering costs. You've said nothing about the current property owners in the designated area, and what is their part? Do they have any rights? Where does that fall?
Okay, good question. So I did allude to the fact at the beginning that just because someone is a property owner doesn't automatically qualify them to become a redeveloper of their property. The redevelopment selection process is very clear. That's a decision to be made by the municipality. I also mentioned that although condemnation is sometimes a feature of redevelopment, not so in Millburn. So if there are property owners, private property owners, and there are some in the designated redevelopment area, and I'm distinguishing that, important to know, from the downtown visioning area where there are a lot of private property owners. There's not so many in the redevelopment area. And so those private property owners may be willing to participate in some way or not. But if they're not willing, they're not going to be part of the process.
All right, last question, Mr. Chase.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to ask a follow-up. It's really appreciated. So yeah, my understanding is the township is now actively involved in mediation regarding in court to settle its fair share housing obligation in the declaratory judgment action that it has filed. And part of that is figuring out overlay zoning for multifamily housing areas. And my understanding is that this redevelopment area will have an opportunity for multifamily housing. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's my understanding. So I'm not so those are very closely related, and the other track of the negotiations have been in process for years. So I wasn't quite, or I didn't quite understand your response that it's sort of premature to discuss how those two connect. They seem like they're very connected, and they've been connected for quite some time.
Well, let me describe it further. What I meant when I said it's premature is that there's not a redevelopment plan yet that talks about what will be the redevelopment project in this area. I can't say that it's going to be multi-family housing there because there's not a plan. That's what I meant by premature. We don't know yet.
Yeah, and I think also, sorry, Joe, go ahead.
If I could just say further, because of the last question about engaging the community, it's important to engage the community in that conversation to develop the plan. And so we haven't engaged the community in the development of this plan yet. So it's premature to talk about what will be built or what the plan will authorize to be built. That's what I meant.
Right. And I think it's also important, again, that the township has submitted its fair share in housing and element plan, which included overlay zoning on several locations, including the B2 and the CMO zones and those things. That plan in and of itself did not include any part of the redevelopment area. But as Joe said, I think it's very early yet in terms of this, where we're just coming out and explaining what the process is and trying to continue the education of what redevelopment is and how that works and what it looks like. So it is probably, to Joe's point, a bit premature, but I can understand Mr. Chase's, seeing those as sort of parallel or on, having to do with one another. But right now, I think we're just here, kind of explaining that what the process is for the redevelopment area as it was designated back in 2007, actually. And the plan was put forth in 2008 and failed at that time. So, okay. Well, again, really appreciate everybody coming out, being a part of this information session. We did have 20 at the beginning, and certainly, I think that's a fairly strong turnout for a Monday night session. But we will look to actually have another one at some point. It will be very similar material, but certainly an opportunity to ask any additional questions. We will post this video as well as the PowerPoint presentation once the video has been downloaded from the cloud and able to be posted. I just ask for people's patience. That will be sometime tomorrow, but may not be till the afternoon. Beth or Joe, do you have any closing comments or remarks before we get going?
I yield to Beth, and then I'll say something.
Nope, that's all. Thank you for participation.
I just want to say that I appreciate all the questions. They were well-informed and well thought out. And thank you for listening to me talk about redevelopment, which is something I love to do. And I don't find that many people who want to listen to me about it. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening, everyone.